This podcast powered by Growth Suite. Growth Suite helps you to run smart discount campaigns on your store. Test it for free on your Shopify store. Just land on the Shopify App Store now and test it for free. Ever feel like an online store just, well, reads your mind?
Uh-huh.
The recommendations pop up, they seem perfect, and you actually wonder, do these algorithms know me better than my friends do?
Right. It can feel eerily accurate sometimes.
But what if that feeling, that sense of being understood, is maybe a bit of an illusion?
Mm-hmm.
What if our brains are just sort of wired to see connections, to see patterns where maybe none truly exist?
That's exactly what we're diving into today, this fascinating idea called the clustering illusion.
Okay.
And this isn't just some, quirky psychological thing. This deep dive is specifically looking at how this clustering illusion plays out in e-commerce psychology.
With the product recommendations we all see.
Exactly, those ubiquitous systems. And we're drawing heavily on Mohammed Tafekkapan's article, The Clustering Illusion and Pattern Recognition for Product Recommendations E-commerce Psychology, which came out March 23rd, 2025.
Okay, so our mission today is pretty clear then. We want to understand why we tend to spot these patterns in recommendations that might actually be random.
Right, and how that affects us as shoppers, how it affects the systems themselves.
And crucially, what can actually be done about it, if anything?
Yeah, because it's important to grasp that this isn't just about our perception, This tendency can actually influence how the algorithms are designed.
How they behave, how they're built in the first place.
Exactly. It shapes the tech we interact with daily.
Okay, so let's get down to it. What exactly is this clustering illusion? Break it down for us.
Well, it's simply put, it's our brain's built-in tendency, kind of a default setting, to see patterns in data that is, in reality, completely random.
Like seeing shapes in clouds or faces in toast.
Precisely. That's a great analogy. We group stars into constellations, right? But those groupings are based on our perspective from Earth. They aren't like inherent structures out there in space.
So our brain is just constantly searching for order, trying to make sense of things, even if it's chaos.
That's a good way to put it.
Correct.
And it's not a new concept. Way back in the 1970s, you had Amos Tversky and Daniel Kahneman doing their groundbreaking work.
The behavioral economics pioneers.
The very same. They showed how consistently we underestimate just how likely it is for random processes to produce results that look non-random.
We expect randomness to look messier, more spread out.
Yeah, something like that. So
Yeah.
when we see clusters or streaks like a basketball player hitting several shots in a row, we instinctively think, there must be a reason they're hot.
When it could just be chance.
Exactly. And this clustering illusion, it's related to other cognitive quirks, right? The article mentions a couple.
Were they apophenia?
Right. Apophenia is a sort of broader term for just seeing connections between unrelated things. And then there's pareidolia.
That's the face one, isn't it? Seeing faces in random things.
Yep. Like the man in the moon or seeing a face on Mars. Our brains are just hardwired to look for familiar structures.
Even when they're not really there.
And it goes beyond just seeing things.
Yeah.
The article points out everyday examples. Gamblers thinking they're on a lucky streak.
Even though each roll of the dice is independent.
Right. Or investors convinced they see clear trends in the stock market when it might just be random fluctuations.
Well, and even us shoppers thinking, they always put the coffee on sale on Mondays.
When it could just be coincidence. Exactly. So this fundamental human tendency, how does it actually interact with these product recommendation systems that are, everywhere now?
Yeah, how does that psychology meet the technology?
Well, first, let's just briefly trace how these systems evolved, because they weren't always so sophisticated. Back in the 90s, early e-commerce.
Pretty basic stuff, I imagine.
Very basic. Mostly just showing the most popular items, like here's what everyone else is buying.
The online bestseller list.
Pretty much. But then things got more clever. Collaborative filtering came along.
That's based on what similar people bought, right? Customers who bought X also bought Y.
Exactly. And then you had content-based filtering, which looks at the attributes of the products themselves. Like, you like this sci-fi movie, so here's another one.
Okay.
And today, most systems are hybrid. They combine these approaches, throw in machine learning. It gets pretty complex, aiming for hyper-personalization.
And these systems are hugely important for businesses, aren't they? The impact is massive.
Oh, absolutely massive. The article cites some big numbers. Amazon apparently attributes up to, 35% of its revenue just to recommendations?
Wow, that's huge.
And Netflix estimates it saves about $1 billion a year because its recommendations keep people subscribed, reduce churn.
Keeps them engaged. finding new things to watch.
Exactly. And think about it from the shopper side. Something like 91% of us apparently prefer brands that remember our preferences and give relevant suggestions.
We like feeling understood, even if it's by an algorithm.
Right. So these systems are vital. Driving sales, keeping customers happy.
Yeah.
They're core to the business.
Okay, so we've got this human tendency, the clustering illusion, and we've got these powerful, important algorithms. Where do they collide? How does the illusion mess with the recommendations?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting and maybe a little concerning. The clustering illusion doesn't just affect how we perceive the recommendations. It can actually influence how the algorithms are designed and trained in the first place.
Wait, the people building the systems are susceptible too?
Of course, they're human. Data scientists, algorithm developers, their brains are also wired to spot patterns.
So they might look at a pile of shopping data and see a connection.
That isn't actually statistically significant. It could just be random noise. But they might think it's a meaningful insight.
And then what?
Well, they might select certain features for their algorithm based on that perceived pattern. Or they might misinterpret a random correlation like people who buy expensive coffee also happen to buy high-end water filters as a causal link.
When it's just coincidence.
Possibly. And as a result, they could end up designing systems that actively reinforce these patterns, even if they were just chance occurrences initially.
So the algorithm isn't just observing behavior, it could be creating it in a way.
Exactly. The article talks about this feedback loop. It's crucial.
Explain that loop.
Okay, so the algorithm spots a pattern, could be real, could be illusory. Based on this, it makes recommendations.
Right. People who bought spatulas also bought garden gnomes.
Maybe. So users see this recommendation, some click, maybe some buy, others ignore it, this new behavior.
Feed back into the system as data.
Precisely. And this new data can then strengthen the very pattern the algorithm first identified, whether it was real or not.
Whoa. So a random connection, spatulas and gnomes, could become a real pattern just because the system kept suggesting them together and enough people eventually clicked.
That's the potential danger. What starts as random chance can get amplified and solidified into an artificial pattern through this cycle of suggestions and responses. The algorithm essentially creates the reality it thinks it's detecting.
That's mind-bending and a bit unsettling, like you said. So our own desire to find patterns shapes the tech, which then shapes our behavior. Wow. But why? Why are our brains so obsessed with pattern finding? What's the deep psychology?
Well, it goes way back. Evolutionarily speaking, pattern recognition was incredibly important for survival.
Like spotting predator tracks.
Yeah.
Or knowing which plants are safe to eat.
Exactly. Being able to quickly identify regularities in the environment was a massive advantage. So over millennia, our brains got really, really good at it. Maybe even a little too good sometimes.
Okay, survival makes sense. What else?
There's also this fundamental human need for meaning and structure. We generally don't like randomness or uncertainty. It makes us uncomfortable.
We want explanations.
Right. We prefer a narrative, even if it's based on flimsy evidence. So when we see recommendations, we instinctively try to figure out the why. They suggested this because I watched that.
We create a story around it.
We do. And then there's the representativeness heuristic.
Okay, what's that?
It's basically judging how likely something is based on how well it matches our mental prototype or our self-image. If recommendations fit how we see ourselves.
We're more likely to think they're accurate and super personalized.
Exactly. Plus, as we mentioned, we consistently underestimate randomness. We see a streak of good recommendations and think, wow, this algorithm is brilliant.
Nah, maybe it just got lucky a few times in a row.
Right. And layered on top of all that, you have selective attention and confirmation bias.
Yeah, the big ones. We notice what we expect to notice.
Precisely. We pay more attention to the recommendations that confirm our preferences, and we tend to ignore or quickly forget the ones that miss the mark.
So we're basically building our own case for the algorithm's genius by filtering the evidence.
In a way, yes. Our mind actively shapes our perception of the system's accuracy.
And this isn't just psychological, right? There's actual brain stuff happening.
Neurology. Oh, yeah. Specific brain regions are involved. The prefrontal cortex, the parietal cortex, they're key for identifying and interpreting patterns. The hippocampus helps recognize familiar patterns by checking against our memories.
Okay.
But here's a really cool part. Dopamine.
The reward chemical.
Exactly. When we successfully recognize a pattern, our brain releases dopamine. It feels good.
That aha moment.
That's the one. It's pleasurable. It's part of why games and puzzles are enjoyable. We're getting these little neurochemical rewards for figuring things out.
But that could also make us overconfident. If finding a pattern feels good, we're less likely to question if it's real.
That's the potential downside. We might trust our pattern spotting abilities more than we should, especially when the patterns are actually illusions.
And does everyone fall for this equally? Or do individual differences matter?
They definitely matter. Personality traits play a role. Someone with a high need for closure, like clear answers quickly, or a low tolerance for ambiguity.
They might see more patterns.
Research suggests they do, yeah. Compared to people comfortable with uncertainty. Statistical literacy is also huge. If you understand probability, you're better equipped to spot randomness for what it is.
Makes sense. What else?
Even cultural background might have a subtle influence, perhaps emphasizing connections and meaning differently. And expertise is tricky.
How so?
Well, an expert might genuinely spot subtle patterns others miss, but their existing knowledge can also create biases, making them prone to seeing illusory patterns that fit their theories.
So it's a really complex mix. Our evolution, brain chemistry, personality, knowledge, all pushing us towards seeing patterns. Okay, let's switch perspective. How do the machines find patterns? The algorithms themselves.
Right, let's look at the machine learning side. A big category is clustering algorithms.
Grouping similar things together.
Exactly. Grouping similar customers based on their buying habits or similar products. K-means is a common one. It tries to divide customers into a set number of groups.
Like trend-focused millennials or price-sensitive parents.
Kind of like that, yeah. So you can target recommendations to those segments. Then there's hierarchical clustering, which builds more like a tree structure, showing relationships between products or categories.
Useful for suggesting related items, like different types of coffee makers.
Could be. You also have density-based clustering, which is good for finding unusual patterns, maybe niche interests or even fraud. And Gaussian mixture models handle the fact that people often belong to multiple groups, You might like sci-fi and gourmet cooking.
Right, our interests aren't always neat boxes, so clustering is one tool. What else do they use?
Oh, lots of stuff. Supervised learning uses labeled data like knowing what you did buy versus what you just looked at to predict preferences.
Learning from past actions.
Yep. Unsupervised learning tries to find hidden structures without those labels. Feature extraction identifies important characteristics like brand, color, price range for products, or click frequency for users. And dimensionality reduction simplifies really complex data, boiling it down to the key underlying patterns.
Sounds sophisticated. But the big question remains. How do they tell a real pattern from just random noise? How do they avoid the clustering illusion themselves?
That is the fundamental challenge. And honestly, they often struggle. They use various methods to try and validate patterns.
Like what?
Statistical significance testing, basically asking how likely is this pattern to occur just by chance. Cross-validation, testing the pattern on different chunks of data to see if it holds up.
Okay.
A/B testing is crucial, trying different recommendation approaches with real users to see what actually works better in practice. And metrics like precision and recall help balance showing relevant stuff versus avoiding irrelevant stuff.
So they are trying to be rigorous, but the article suggests challenges remain.
Big challenges. Overfitting is a classic one. The algorithm learns the training data too well, including its noise and random quirks.
So it doesn't generalize to new customers or situations.
Exactly. Sample size is another issue. With small amounts of data, random fluctuations can look statistically significant when they aren't. And temporal effects, like a holiday shopping spike, can be mistaken for a long-term trend if you're not careful.
So even the machines aren't immune. They can be fooled by randomness, too.
Definitely. Distinguishing signal from noise remains a core difficulty in machine learning.
Okay, now let's bring it back to us, the consumers. How do we actually perceive and react to these recommendations day to day? Are we even aware of these potential illusions?
It's a really complex relationship we have with the recommendations. We tend to build trust over time, right? Each good suggestion makes us believe a little more.
Yeah, you get a few good movie picks, you start to rely on it.
But there's often this gap. The article calls it a perception gap between how accurate we think the recommendations are and how accurate they might actually be, statistically speaking.
We might overestimate them?
Often, yes. There's also this personalization illusion. We might feel the recommendations are incredibly tailored to us, personally, maybe more than they really are.
And our reactions can be emotional too, right?
Totally. Delight when it gets it right, maybe even slight unease if it's too accurate, but definitely frustration when the suggestions are way off base.
Yeah, getting recommendations for baby clothes when you don't have kids.
Exactly. And interestingly, just explaining why something is recommended can make us perceive the system as more accurate, even if the recommendation itself is the same. It's called the transparency effect.
Just knowing the why makes us trust it more. Fascinating. And our own biases are still working overtime here, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Confirmation bias is huge. We notice and remember the recommendations that fit our self-image or past behavior.
And we forget the misses.
We tend to, yeah. We also make attribution errors. Good recommendation. Wow, smart algorithm. Bad recommendation. Yeah, weird fluke. Or maybe we blame something else. Our memory selectively reinforces the hits.
And we might just be blind to the randomness sometimes. A great recommendation could just be luck.
Exactly. We fail to recognize chance. So all these biases together mean we might perceive a merely okay system as being really quite good because our minds are filtering and interpreting the information favorably.
We're giving the algorithms the benefit of the doubt, essentially. And does this have bigger consequences? Beyond our individual perception, market impacts.
It really does.
Yeah.
If we're constantly shown things that fit existing, potentially illusory patterns, it can limit our discovery of new, genuinely different products.
We get stuck in a recommendation rut.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And products can gain artificial popularity just by getting caught in these feedback loops. They get recommended, people buy them, they get recommended more. Not necessarily because they're the best, but because the algorithm keeps pushing them.
Meanwhile, niche or unusual products might struggle.
Exactly. Long tail invisibility. If it doesn't fit a detected pattern, it might never get shown. You could even end up with these satisfaction paradoxes.
Meaning,
People might say they're happy with the recommendations, but they're actually being exposed to a narrower and narrower range of stuff over time. Think about music streaming. You might end up listening to variations of the same few artists. It can lead to homogenized recommendations across the whole market.
so these helpful tools could inadvertently make things less diverse, less interesting.
That's the potential long-term risk, yeah. It's not just about individual perception. It affects market dynamics, product visibility, even innovation.
Okay, we've covered a lot of the theory and the potential issues. Are there concrete, real-world examples where this clustering illusion has actually caused problems for big recommendation systems?
Oh, definitely. The article touches on several. Even giants like Amazon have had embarrassing moments, recommendations linking completely inappropriate items because of random co-purchases that the algorithm misinterpreted.
Like suggesting bomb-making materials alongside something innocent? I think I read about cases like that.
Things like that, yes. Or just bizarre product groupings that make no logical sense, but got created by a feedback loop. Seasonal misinterpretations are common too. Holiday gift patterns persisting into February.
And wasn't there that crazy example of a book on Amazon about flies? Its price spiraled up to millions.
Ah, yes, the $23 million book. That was a classic case of algorithmic feedback loops where competing pricing algorithms kept reacting to each other, pushing the price into absurdity. An extreme example of an illusion created by interacting algorithms.
So what do companies do when this happens? How do they recover?
They've learned a few tricks. Introducing randomness deliberately, sometimes called serendipity, can help break feedback loops. Using time-weighted data, so recent behavior matters more than old, potentially outdated patterns, and having multiple layers of validation before showing a recommendation.
And it's not just e-commerce, right? Streaming platforms face this too.
Absolutely. Netflix has famously tweaked its systems over the years, learning to balance algorithms with human curation because purely algorithmic categories sometimes got really weird.
Right, those hyper-specific genre names.
Exactly. Spotify actively tries to combat the filter bubble by injecting diversity into playlists like Discover Weekly. And YouTube's rabbit holes are a well-known phenomenon. Algorithms amplifying viewing patterns that can lead users down increasingly narrow content paths.
Netflix also moved away from star ratings to the percentage match, didn't they?
They did, which is interesting because it kind of acknowledges the inherent fuzziness. It avoids creating a false sense of precision about whether you'll like something based on potentially shaky patterns.
And in finance, where mistakes can be really costly.
Even more critical there, automated trading systems have famously failed by mistaking random market noise for predictable patterns. Robo-advisors have to be super careful not to overreact to short-term blips.
Misinterpreting volatility is a trend.
Exactly. And risk assessment models have made errors by finding illusory patterns in customer data that didn't actually predict loan defaults or other risks. It's serious enough that regulators are paying more attention, demanding more transparency, and proof that these financial algorithms aren't just chasing ghosts in the data.
So these case studies really drive home that this isn't just academic. It's a practical challenge with real consequences.
Okay.
Okay, so given all this, what can actually be done? What are the practical mitigation strategies?
Right. How do we build better, more reliable systems? There are a few key areas. Statistically, first off,
More rigorous math.
pretty much using proper sample sizes, obviously. Employing randomization testing, comparing your observed pattern against thousands of randomly generated data sets to see how often it occurs by chance.
Like a reality check.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Bootstrap techniques, which involve resampling your own data, can test pattern stability. And Bayesian methods allow you to factor in prior knowledge, like, is this correlation between spatulas and gnomes actually plausible to begin with?
So questioning the patterns statistically before trusting them. Makes sense. What about the algorithm design itself?
Huge potential there. One big idea is actively promoting diversity in recommendations. Don't just show things that fit the pattern. Deliberately include some outliers, some novelty.
To break the loops and encourage exploration.
Precisely. Explainable AI is also key. If the system can explain why it's making a recommendation in a way humans can understand, it helps developers debug and users evaluate.
The transparency thing again?
Multi-objective optimization helps too, designing algorithms that don't just maximize clicks or purchases based on patterns, but also balance that with goals like diversity or user satisfaction. And time-sensitive evaluation, constantly checking if old patterns still hold true.
Like maybe people who bought sweaters in December aren't still primarily interested in sweaters in July.
You'd hope the system figures that out.
Well,
So maybe deliberately suggesting books from a genre someone hasn't explored before just to test the waters?
okay, so better stats, smarter algorithms. What about the user interface? How we actually see the recommendations?
That matters a lot too. Simple things like confidence indicators, we're pretty sure you'll like this, versus here's something different you might explore.
Managing expectations.
Exactly. Visualizing the patterns can help users understand the why, offering multiple ways to discover products, not just the main recommendation feed. And crucially, giving users more control.
How so?
Letting users fine-tune parameters, explicitly say, I don't like this kind of recommendation, or provide more detailed feedback. Empowering the user to guide the algorithm. Amazon explaining why something is recommended based on your viewing history, frequently bought together, is a step in that direction.
It gives you context to judge the recommendation.
Right. It helps you decide if the pattern they found is actually relevant to you right now.
Okay, these all sound like really positive steps. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways? For businesses, for algorithm designers, for us as consumers?
Well, for algorithm designers and the businesses using them, the big message is, yes, find patterns, that's your job, but be deeply skeptical. Actively try to disprove them.
Don't just fall in love with the first pattern you see.
Exactly. Build systems that encourage exploration, not just exploitation of existing patterns. Use multiple validation methods. Strive for transparency.
And for us, the shoppers.
Be aware of your own brain's tendency to seek patterns. Just because a recommendation feels right or a set of them seems coherent doesn't mean it's the whole story or the best fit for you.
Keep an open mind. Explore beyond the suggestion.
Definitely. A little critical thinking goes a long way. Don't let the illusion of perfect personalization keep you in a filter bubble. Recognize that sometimes a good recommendation is just luck.
That's a great final thought. We need to balance the convenience of these systems with a healthy dose of skepticism and maybe a bit of deliberate exploration. This has been really insightful. Understanding the clustering illusion definitely changes how you look at those recommended for use sections.
It really does. It's
Yeah.
about finding that balance between leveraging powerful algorithms and recognizing the quirks of human cognition, both our own and those embedded in the systems we build. It's an ongoing collaboration, really.
A collaboration we need to be mindful of. Fantastic. Remember, Shopify store owners, you can leverage many of the best practices we discussed today with Growth Suite. It offers advanced pattern validation and transparent recommendation strategies to help you boost sales effectively. Test it for free on your Shopify store today. Just head to the Shopify App Store and search for Growth Suite to try it out.